Welcome to In Search of Catholic School Excellence, the show where we spotlight the programs, people, and practices making a real difference in Catholic education today. If you're a school leader striving to build a community of faith, excellence, and innovation, you've come to the right place. Each episode brings you ideas that are working, stories that inspire, and new possibilities for your school's mission. Let's explore what's working and what's possible. Hi, folks. Welcome back. This week, we're talking about a school technology checklist. I was just thinking that after we've talked about all these emission things, we've been talking about some of these other topics that, making sure that we've got those basics in line is so important. So we had published this school technology checklist a couple of years ago, and we wanted to share it with everybody here, but it might make sense for us to go through it because it may not make sense out of context. So today I'm joined by Becky Wong, and we're going to discuss this checklist. So Becky, I know that you did a good deal of the work. In fact, like 92.9% of the work on this. Why should somebody be looking at this checklist? And why does this checklist come about?
Oh, yes. So every year, especially the beginning of the school year, we'll have new techs or a new person at a school, and they'll ask for, like, oh, hey, what's the new tech curriculum? What do I need to know? And this is the essential guide, super basic, but something to run down every year. It doesn't have to be in the beginning of the school year, could be the middle of the school year after all the craziness happens. But it's definitely something to check annually or even every few months to say, hey, where are we? Another good time to check is at the end of the year so you could prepare for the next school year. And these are things that just help the school run. And I know a lot of times people might run away from it because it costs money, but think of how much better it would be when things work versus, oh no, the internet's down. The kids can't get on star testing. So these are definitely things to check on before you have a big event like standardized testing, report cards, teaching in general, everything.
And most of this stuff is about access too, right? So, making sure that the right people have access to the things. So are the things working? That's a good chunk of the checklist, but also do the right people have access, right? And so I think that's what we want to highlight here, that, most importantly, you've got to have your principal have access, right? And then there might be some other people that are involved in that. So,
Oh, definitely. So let's go over the four major areas that we need to look at. Access is the number one thing on the list. A second is infrastructure, just networking, like what's on hand device wise. And then that leads to device life cycle. Hey, when we're doing star testing, are our iPads too old? We don't want to find out the day before testing that star testing is not supported on your device or your Chromebook. And lastly, funding, like how do we get the money or where do we raise the money to fund all these things so that it's not super expensive in one year. But back to what you were saying about access, definitely start with, the major things. Who has Google admin access? Make sure there's at least two people for every essential app or service. The principal definitely should be, the super admin on your Google admin. I think the second thing, make sure your web domain, basically your school address for the internet, make sure that's updated and that you have access to it. I know when I first started as a tech coordinator, one thing that was very unfortunate is that the past principal passed away and he was the only one that was on the account. So I had to contact the provider. I think it was like Network Solutions or something like that. And we had to turn in all sorts of paperwork to make sure that it gets switched over to the new principal and in the office or myself. So we don't want just one person having access. Then, when a renewal comes up, who's going to renew? If your web domain goes down, then you might not have access to your email. And that's happened before.
yeah. So I think a good point about that is, sometimes we definitely want the principal to have access to everything. They are the ruler of the school, if you will. They're the president of everything. They should have access to everything. But sometimes that principal may not feel so tech savvy. So one of the ways, and this is a shout out to Zoltan Borbeli of SPES Technologies, who is talking about, security for our organizations. And the one thing that he does with his clients is he'll write all the passwords down for that super admin, for that principal, put them in an envelope and seal it. They take that envelope and you put it like in the vault. And the principal therefore would have access to all of those things, but they're not going to have that sitting on their computer, on a post-it on their computer, so that anybody can get in. It's in a safe place. And the trick with the sealing of the envelope, which I thought was pretty genius, is if he asks in a some sort of at-risk situation, he asks for that envelope and it's broken, then he knows that somebody in-house did something, right? But I love that idea of you got to make sure that the people who are in charge have access, but they don't necessarily need to have that like sitting on their phone, or having their account lit up with all of those accesses. So that, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Perhaps we have a third account with all of that access that is not directly that principal's account.
Oh, for sure. And it's just, and you've seen it too, where people lose access to their website, the email addresses, but those are definitely things to shore up. But one trick is set a Google Calendar reminder, like annually, remind yourself, okay, maybe even check the school safe. Hey, is that envelope still there? Did it get moved? Where did it go? Did it get open? Right? And it could be at the end of the year too, to make sure, because if anything, if there's a transition in leadership or transition in office staff or whomever, it's there. And we'll all say, oh, yeah, don't forget the envelope, pass that along. But do set a calendar reminder for like renewal dates, and it's not necessarily at the beginning of the school year, end of the school year, January, December, for like your domain, could be licenses to your textbooks or whatnot. Just have a calendar reminder.
It's a good idea to have that calendar also be maybe a third, under a different address, so that multiple people are access to it and it's not directly stuck to that one person's account. So that way that all the people who are involved can be notified. And that's, whether you have your tech person, your tech team picking up on that calendar and just as a reminder, like, hey, principal, time to renew, or the principal does it themselves, or the other admin. It's just a good idea to have multiple people on that and have it not tied to one person's account, because if that calendar goes away when that person leaves, then you've also missed out. So, we love using service emails for these kinds of things where they're going to persist long after any one user. So that's a great way of doing it. I like that calendar reminder.
And the last thing about access and calendar reminders, what I did is that I put a note linked to a Google Doc so that it's not like renew domain and someone says, what is that? There's a link to it and it goes to a Google Doc or a spreadsheet. And I did this with a textbook renewal because it's such a pain. Like so every year around, I forget, was it March? Here's a reminder, order textbooks, here's a spreadsheet, and you don't have to go hunting for things. So Google Calendar reminders, link it to a Google Doc or some sort of spreadsheet so that people know what it is. Like what is
Yeah, definitely a good idea. We always talk about the, storing of that kind of sensitive information, and whether that's, everybody should have a password manager at this point, but maybe you store that link to that document in the password manager, or that document, just having a document that is centralized, that all of that stuff is in there. Maybe you don't keep your passwords inside that document, but you keep the links to everything inside that document. And that can be, the thing that gets passed from person to person as needed.
Oh, and we had a discussion about this, especially because a lot of people reach out to us about access. Please do make sure that the two people that you have that have access are school employees, because a lot of times we do have parent volunteers that are experts in their field and they offer to help you build a website for free, or they offer to, set something up. I know in the last episode I talked about Salesforce, a parent set that up for us, but then the parent left and then there's no one that knows what to do with it. So same thing in terms of access. It's nice that we do have parent volunteers, but we have to make sure it's a school staff member.
Yeah, and if that parent is helping us, that's one of those accounts. But we have, those two on staff that can be the backups. And I think it's good. You mentioned having the two and having two on staff because, God forbid something happens to somebody and then we lose that access. But there's also, we've had a recent situation where, someone was even gone for a while and not accessible. Therefore, all of the things that they were controlling were, on hold. So that, makes it very difficult if you don't have multiple access to those things for somebody in school. And if somebody leaves, you just got to make sure, and that's that calendar reminder helps out, make sure that we've got that next person in line so we can add them to that list.
Well, speaking of access, a different kind of access is like infrastructure. Ask your teachers, ask your students, like, hey, how's the connection? How's the Wi-Fi in the building? We can have all the accounts and the most like up-to-date, latest fancy computers, but if your network infrastructure can't support all this new gear or the amount of gear you have, then that's just going to go to waste. You have like $2,000 computers, but if your network infrastructure is like weak, then that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, you definitely you want to have more is better. It's, you equate it to having a freeway. And if that freeway is only two lanes, there's only a certain speed that you're going to be able to get. And you pump a bunch of cars through there, it's going to be very difficult. So the more lanes we have, the easier it can go. And not everybody can go, keeping this car analogy going, not every car can go 200 miles an hour. So therefore, you want to have the lanes, more lanes, so that nobody is fighting with each other in that. And that's, we talk about congestion on a network. You just have too many people trying to use the same lanes. And if you have more lanes, it allows for all that to happen. So the more bandwidth you have, the more devices can be on that network, even if they're not all going 200 miles an hour, right? They can be, riding their Prius nice and slow on that freeway and not bothered by the cars that might be wanting to whiz by. So that's where it is. And I think we get wrapped up in more and more. There's two sides to the more, more, more. One, some devices can't handle that speed. So maybe more is not necessary.
Mhm.
But if you can get as much as you can at an affordable price, you might as well, because that just opens up your freeway to more lanes. And I think right now, like most of the folks or internet providers can get you a gig or close to it and for not that much. I know that Comcast, or if you're a Spectrum customer from somewhere else in the country, like they're limited or they're limiting and it's costing, a little bit more for that. So we have some folks at like 600 that might work out for them. And no one device is going to see 600 except for maybe your brand new cell phone, but that's going to open up enough roads. Now we do have a school, we've had a school that had 800 devices on only 100 down. So it is possible. And if the network is built well, then it can handle it. But more is better.
So what are your recommendations for like the minimum and also in terms of like equipment, like how many access points? What's a good in terms of like placement?
Sure. As far as the minimum, you want to get at least 100 down. I know that you can operate on less than that, but 100 down on a small school would work out nice. As we mentioned, we do have a school that has 800 devices that was running on 100 down. They since upgraded and, no problems there. But that 100 down allows them to at least do the bare minimum of what they need, right? Now, most internet providers don't give you, what do they call it? Synchronous speeds.
Hmm.
So the 100 down would usually come with a 15 up. And the Comcast Spectrum users, you're probably looking at like a 600 down and a 40 up. And we would love to get to those service providers that can give us synchronous so that the up and down is the same number. Here in the Bay Area, we've got a handful of companies that can do that. We've got Sonic and Monkey Brains and a few others that will give you, 200, 200 or a gig, and they're relatively inexpensive. But if you're out in the middle of, a farming community or something like that, and it's a little bit harder, then you just got to take what you can get. But ideally, you're going to get to at least 100. As far as the access points goes, all the buildings that we're working out in here were built in the, pre-50s era. And so they are dense as all dense can be. Concrete is crazy. Wi-Fi doesn't like concrete, it doesn't like glass, and it doesn't like water. So if you can keep your Wi-Fi away from those three things, it's great. Now, obviously, in the classroom, you have windows, but if you're not trying to use the signal through the window, then you're fine. So we try to put one access point in each room.
Hmm.
And the rule of thumb is if you can see it, you can feel it, right? So if you can't see that access point from where you are in that room, it's probably going to be a weak signal or no signal. But if you keep it within view, you can probably get access to it.
Oh yeah. Because sometimes having too many access point is bad too, but depending on the structure of the building, can it be, it's not like a house where, mostly thin walls made from wood, but schools are definitely a different ball of wax. Tell us more about like firewalls and content filtering. Why do schools need that?
So yeah, after you've got access and you've got things working, you might need to have some security on it, right? And so the basic firewall, the idea behind a firewall is that it keeps the bad guys out and lets the good guys through and allows your users to use the internet safely. Nothing is foolproof, but a good firewall will allow for those things to happen. And sometimes included in the firewall, you get a filter, which will keep kids off of bad websites. And it allows you to separate your network into different networks so that kids can be on one network that might be more heavily filtered than what the staff or faculty would be on. But the firewall will allow them to do that, and the filter will then block those sites. It's important to have those things in place. It can be a very simple firewall if you're not so worried about it, but as our cyber security issues keep growing, we may be looking at more and more advanced firewalls. If you don't have somebody on site who can handle that, reach out to somebody in the community who can do that. And this is where you may not want to lean on a parent for your access. So if you're looking for an IT company, I know a couple good folks who can do these kinds of things. But at the same time, it's good to have a professional who can manage that for you. And there's a lot of great companies out there that will manage it for a fee instead of having you to put out a big chunk of change. Because typically with those higher security settings, there's going to be a yearly subscription. And that yearly subscription can be like, 3,000 plus dollars on top of a $3,000 device. But some of these companies will do that for a monthly fee of like $100 or $200 or whatever it might be, which is a much easier way to do it. And it's somebody else's problems keeping you secure. So that's, always food for thought, but it's important. Make sure you have a firewall, make sure you have a content filter to keep your kids safe.
About content filtering, I do get a lot of requests from principals where I just got one like 20 minutes ago saying, hey, kids can get onto Minecraft or get onto whatever website, some gaming website. And these sites pop up very frequently, and kids find ways to get through your firewall, filtering, whatnot. So, like you said, having someone help you manage it would be such a relief because kids just get into stuff. And we want them to use their devices for learning, not to play games.
Yeah, and that's, going back to those filters, if the student network's filtered and the faculty network is not filtered, and kids get on that faculty network, you got all kinds of problems. So that's why we don't want passwords, on people's laptops, posted in the room for those faculty networks. Especially what really should happen in a perfectly designed network, nobody would have passwords. There'd be profiles on everyone's devices that would allow the access or not access. And if you're really fancy, depending on what your email is, you would get access to the internet or a different level of internet. So those are more advanced, but changing the password periodically and making sure that password is not posted all over the universe. It's very easy to set up a guest network so people can be on that guest network. I would still filter the guest network,
Hmm.
but that's the network that people can put their phones on, and kids can potentially, if they leave the school network to join a different network, they can join that one and still be safe.
And I've done in the past where we even made temporary guest networks for like festivals where it might be, parent volunteers. So it's not the standard guest network for the school. We'll just put it up for a fall festival and just take it back down after they're done using it so that, you know, passwords get passed around and we don't want just any random person to have it. And lastly, about infrastructure, documentation. It's not fun, but it's so helpful because we go to so many different schools. When we step in, we're like, where's the network closet? Where's the modem? If you had documentation, troubleshooting, tech supporting, and response would be so much faster.
Yeah, it's definitely not fun, but having that network map is huge. We just got a call this morning about that and not having a port plugged in somewhere.
Right. Or a copier.
Yeah, on a system that, has been upgraded. And so you've not having that map makes it very difficult to figure out where things go. And, if you don't have the historical knowledge, then that documentation is everything. So when you're passing something along to the next person, it's huge to have. And if you don't have that network map, reach out to your tech provider and ask them to do it. It might cost a few $100s to get that done because they got to go and check everything and put it into a report for you that you can put into a binder, which you can also save in that shared Google Drive or that, tech Bible that we talked about earlier. whatever it might be, you want that information so that when it comes time to upgrade or do something else, that they're not starting over from scratch. Because if every time you have a network upgrade, a tech vendor comes in and has to remap the whole network, that's
Right.
just silly. But if you can hand them that after doing it once, then they can see everything very quickly and make the assessment very quickly. No need to charge you extra for that.
Oh, yeah, and definitely. Like our situation this morning is very simple. They moved the copier from one room to another room, and then they're like, oh, we're just going to plug it in. But it didn't work because that port wasn't active. So, how great would it be if we had documentation? Oh, yeah, that goes with port 20. Go into the network closet and make sure port 20 is plugged in, and just a simple plugging a cable. And, Office, even the teacher can do that. So, yeah, totally essential. It's painful, but it is also very painful when teachers are like, we can't print to the copier now, and they have to wait, till tomorrow. And, as a teacher back in the day, it's like sometimes we're short one copy of for the test, and it's annoying when you can't make that one copy, right? Speaking of security and data, that's like the next thing on the list, like your student information system, like who's managing that? Is it just one person? Again, can't just be the principal. We want someone on staff, doesn't have to be the office too. He should be a dedicated person that can onboard a new family when, a student comes in mid-year or maybe like a week later, like who's managing that information? And then also in terms of like backup, do you have a backup for all the student data? Thomas, what are your recommendation for backups?
Well, obviously, if you're a Google school or a Microsoft school, you have that shared kind of drive situation where you can save a copy of that there. But for this kind of information, you want to make sure that it's secure and it's not accessible to anybody. The computers that all this stuff lives on needs to be backed up. Now, if you're using a cloud service, they may or may not have backups. And so that may be something you ask your student information system about. Do you have a backup? And what do we need to do every summer to make sure that data is backed up? So we typically will back up, the grade books and the report cards and
Mhm.
attendance and those types of things. But you want to keep that stuff. The real one that I worry about is we have the student information system, but before it gets in the student information system, there's typically some sort of database that lives on an office computer. And that
Mhm.
might be a spreadsheet, it might be something more sophisticated like FileMaker Pro or Airtable. But that data that gets put in at the very beginning, a new student comes in, all the stuff gets typed in. Ideally, it's all going directly into that student information system. But we know that there are documents and folders and all this other stuff containing student information on those computers in the office. And so we want to make sure A, that those computers are secure, and B, that they're backed up. And so if you're doing a local backup, a simple time machine or Windows backup to those machines on a physical hard drive is great. And then using something like a Crash Plan Pro or Backblaze on those office computers to make sure that stuff's backed up somewhere else. And without going too far down the road of backups, we want to have the rule of thumb is a 3-2-1 plan. You want to have 3 copies with 2 identical copies, and one of those has to be offsite. So you want to have that be in the cloud or on another computer offsite. If your school goes down in flames, that you haven't lost all that stuff, or if the computer that the stuff lives on dies,
Mhm.
that it doesn't die with it. Because if the computer and the local backup both died in the same power outage,
Oh, yeah, for
you are
sure.
stuck. So make sure you got 3 copies, 2 identical, and one of them offsite. And that for most part, you can do those things. And the backup software, I know it's never fun to pay for stuff that you never look at, but the backup software I use is like $8 a month, and Backblaze is like $5 a month. If you told me I could get back all of my sensitive data, like all of my data, for like $100 a year, it would cost me $100 to get my data back. I'd be like, yes, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Like, how many times did someone say, "Oh no, I lost all my photos"? If you had a back, and those things are priceless. You'll never be able to get that back. So it might be pretty annoying to, have to pay monthly $20 or whatnot for your backup, but that's going to be totally worth it when data is lost, your hard drive crashes or whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, and even at the teacher level, like even if you're not an admin and you're not dealing with like really sensitive stuff, just having your local backup. If you're on a Mac, you've got the iCloud drive, like storing stuff in there.
Hmm.
Dropbox, 3 terabytes is like 150 bucks a year still. I mean, it's not much to protect your stuff. So it may not mean, the world to the school that you lost your lesson plans, but it means the world to you.
Yeah.
So whatever your pictures, whatever they are that is important to you, make sure that there is a service that you can use to get on that. And Google Drive will work fine to a certain extent, but there's certain limits to that, and so you want to have something else.
Yeah, especially from a teacher's perspective, you spent time writing that curriculum map or you spent time writing that lesson hours and it's lost and you can't get that back. That's like soul crushing. And speaking of Google Drive, it's one of my favorite backups because it's free, it's pretty reliable, but you still have to be careful with Google Drive, especially because it's so easy to share. I had a situation a few months ago where one user was cleaning out their Google Drive and was deleting documents, but it was a shared drive with other members of the office staff or volunteers, and they lost everything. So they reached out to me like, hey, we lost all these really important documents. It was like festival information. And I was like, oh, when did this happen? It was beyond the 25 days of recovery, and I couldn't help them get anything back. And they're like, oh no, can't you contact Google? I'm like, I did, but they told me the same thing.
Yeah,
If it's beyond the 25 days, there's no way of recovering it. And as
that's
much,
a
yeah.
that's a great point too, though, that like these companies are aware that the data is important, and they've put in some fail safes to
Hmm.
make sure that we don't, blow ourselves up. But when we're beyond those fail safes, I mean, 25 days later, that all of your stuff is gone. It's a totally understandable situation where you didn't even realize it was happening, and now it's gone. But we've got to be a little bit more on top of those things, and that's where those backups come in place. One of our services, has that backup, and it just keeps it, forever, even after it's been deleted. That stuff is sitting there. So if that's in place, then the 25 days doesn't matter that much. But we have to work within the confines of those deals. It should not, unless you're paying for it, you're not going to get forever backup for free. So you got to learn how to take care of these things and work within their constraints. But it's good to know that they're at least giving us something so that we can recover when we do have the oops.
Oh, definitely. And I know wasn't malicious. It was just like, oh, I don't need these photos. I don't need this.
Exactly.
In terms of backup and data, other things to consider is like setting up the data itself. Like for academic services and applications, like rostering, that's like a big deal. It's you and I do that a lot, especially over the summer, right before school starts. What are some strategies to managing that and making that easier? It's very painful. Yeah,
Very painful.
60 new students. Now they all need new accounts.
Yeah, I think that goes back to that database. So, one, is there a local database at the school where those users are first coming into? Because you want to have that, and ideally that stuff's getting uploaded in the student information system,
Mhm.
because we can do a lot once it's in the student information system. And if you haven't already signed up for Clever or ClassLink, one of those services, it's free to the schools. The vendors pay for it, but it allows you to connect those things. And some certain student information systems will allow you to connect to other products. But these things like ClassLink and Clever, and we use Clever almost exclusively, they allow for that to happen with almost everything. And so that becomes an automatic up update amongst all of your services. So when you do a lot of hard work to get that set up,
Mhm.
this is definitely not a one person type sitting there doing something like you. This is a team effort to get something like Clever set up. But once it's set up, all of your services are up to date automatically all the time. So that's what's huge. So, number one, make sure you got your local database good, and that's in the student information system. And then let's get that connected to a service like Clever or directly to whatever third party services. So that is automatically updated. You should not be manually updating any of these things. And any of your vendors who are making you manually update, tell them to get working on Clever.
Oh, yeah. It's nice when we get new students like in October or January, but to have to create an account, and the 5 or 6 accounts just like individually, it's very tasking. It's almost like setting up a whole roster for the class. Speaking of classes, what are some learning management systems that teachers can use?
Yeah, so I think it's important to have some sort of digital delivery
Hmm.
and the learning management system for the classrooms. It's a great way to make sure that everyone's organized and the kids are getting everything they need. So we usually push third through eighth grade. We push Google Classroom because that's
Hmm.
free and beautiful. If you're not a Google school, then you got to look at something else. But if you are a Google school, it's a wonderful way to organize data and help you kind of conceive how that class might work, allowing you to push stuff out to the kids. You don't have to tell them to type, the super long email address or website address, right? All that stuff can be built into that system. And then for the little ones, we really like Seesaw, although Seesaw has jumped up in price and some folks have jumped to like Toddle, there are lots of good products for that age group, and Seesaw's worked out pretty well. So you can still use their free version for the most part. That works really well. And their paid version, although it has, I think, almost doubled in price, it's still relatively affordable.
Yeah, and I've used Seesaw in the past, and the free version was like sufficient, and it was great. And if you wanted more, then look at the paid plan. And what's great about both Google Classroom and Seesaw, not only can we deliver content to students where they're not just like Googling the website, oh yeah, we have to go to this website, and they're all over the place. But what's nice is that students can turn in assignments. You can create assignments, give them directions, especially for those who might not get the directions while you say it aloud. It's nice that it's right there. It helps the students who are absent or students who might need more time for an assignment. So, yes, it's both are very good in terms of managing and giving students flexibility and teachers flexibility in terms of like assignments and creating assignments.
Yeah, and I would push all school leaders out there.
Mhm.
You really should think about Google Classroom for your faculty meetings so that
Oh, right.
information can be organized. Any sort of service project type
Mhm.
thing that can be organized that way. Google Classroom is a wonderful way to put that. Your PD for your faculty, that's a wonderful way to put it out there. And combining that with Google Sites and things like Notebook LM, you could really manage a lot of that communication with your staff in such an easy way. So look into it as an administrator for how you disseminate information to your staff. It's a wonderful way to do it.
Oh, yeah, especially if your school is going to through accreditation in the WASC or WCA accreditation, because everyone's split up in teams anyways. Like, hey, who's in charge of like Catholic identity? You can create groups within and assignments within Google Classroom so that you're not like following up on left and right and just shouting in the hallway like, hey, did you finish this report? Or everyone only meets during the faculty meeting to talk about it, but there's no hub, right?
Right.
But
There's no checklist. It's nice when you have a checklist somewhere to say, like, oh, yeah, we did get through those things. Here that stuff is. It's not, lost in some sort of email chain. So, getting us out of the never ending email chain and into something a little bit more organized is huge.
oh, right. And you don't have to email each other the Word document and you're like, what's the latest copy? And I think I've been on like three WASs. I'm usually the person who has to combine all the information. So how great it would it be to have it all in Google Classroom and just access each of the groups and each of the written documentation for it and all the evidence. It's very awesome stuff. Speaking of talking to other people in the building, communication is huge in terms of like just thinking about your overall tech, communication with your staff, communication with your families.
Probably the
And
most important.
yes, most important, what are some safety protocols where tech can help or like tech can be integrated so that it will help you in terms of like emergencies? Like, what have you seen people use?
Well, let's go back to first, whatever you choose, make sure you've got, two or three administrators on this. And in terms of emergencies, we've worked with Remind and Raptor in the past. There are some new products on the scene that we haven't tried out yet, but those two are pretty well vetted. And, they can sync up with your student information system either directly or through Clever. And so you can get those things out, and that will help with text and phone alerts, those types of things. Remind just got bought, but so far they have not destroyed it after being bought by a bigger company. So that's good news.
Oh, that's good to hear. And something to remember is don't just choose one method of communication. So not just email, Make sure you have many ways of communicating with families. When we had emergencies, could be a big storm watch. There's a funeral happening, so it's going to cause traffic congestion. We always had email, we had and a text blast, and we make sure that we don't use the text function so often that people ignore it. So it's only for
Definitely.
emergency situations. And we also had remind just in case text doesn't work. So it's like three methods of communicating with families. And we usually send that simultaneously just in case, someone's more of an email checker or a text, or it could be a notification on the phone.
Mhm.
Just make sure that you have many different ways to communicate with your families.
Yeah, and consider how those things are getting set up.
Hmm.
You may choose one thing because it works really well, and but you're also going to hope that, hey, do you have a connection to our student information system so
Hmm.
that we don't have old contacts in there? We're not dealing with bad information. You
Oh,
want it
right.
to be able to connect to your system some way. So that may be one of those things you ask them. How can I get my data into yours automatically? Right. And so that's, once again, using the student information system or something like Clever to get your stuff into these products. But also, perhaps the student information system has that function, in which case you don't need that particular piece. Maybe you don't need text, but you need the email function or you need whatever else. So I think it's important that when you're evaluating these things, see how it fits into your system so you're not having to update many databases constantly. And I think that's kind of like the recurring theme of this checklist here is, make sure that the right people have access and that the data is being updated properly. And if there's points in that chain that are broken, then things are going to fall apart. So keep that in mind.
And speaking of access, make sure the people who do have access know how to use these apps and they're not just waiting for, oh, the principal's not here. We can't send out the message.
And practice your disasters. You don't want to be learning on the fly when there's actually something going down at the school. I think we just had
Hmm.
the great shakeup or whatever they call it for earthquake preparedness here in San Francisco Bay Area. But, having a once a year type thing may be good, but it's probably good to do once a quarter and just make sure. In the same way that, the fire department comes by and, you do that drill, you can do all the other drills too. And just, work with your families to kind of work out those kinks, so, and also with your staff to make sure they know how to use all of the things. And maybe one of those practices is the principal's not available.
Oh,
So
yeah.
who's going to be next in charge and how do we run that? So you can try all these things out so that when you are in a tough situation, which God willing you never will be, that you're ready for it.
So when we did the emergency preparedness workshops and just doing our like emergency bags, we put in a set of directions on how to get sign into Remind and definitely cover those passwords. We do have it, I think it's on a lanyard. The password was covered up so that any teacher can take their emergency bag and look at the directions. And it was written out. I typed everything out. Here's a website, here's a username and password so that it's not just one point or one person. It's not just a principal, it's not the office, it's not the vice principal. It could be anyone that is designated the lead at the time or the whoever's doing communication. So, and show or remind teachers it's all there so that we're not helpless when an emergency does happen.
Yeah, and that's like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So that annoying task of putting all that stuff together one day, it might take even 6 hours of sitting there and putting that stuff together, but that'll save you when you don't have that time later.
But on non-emergency situations, also do evaluate like how do you communicate with your parents? Is it email? I know we used to use MailChimp, and the benefit of having a service like that is that you can track like how many people opened the school newsletter, are you getting information out? Do you need to do revisions? But also, I know a lot of schools use their SIS. Is that your only way? Is that the best way? Just get some feedback on it and make sure it is set up.
Yeah, and make sure that you have, not only that you've got the system set up, but, one little note to quality here
Mhm.
is that your parent communication, you want it to be consistent. Don't send 55 emails a week randomly. Like we want to be, sending out our news on a regular basis so parents actually read it. Because anything starts sending stuff out irregularly,
Hmm.
folks will think that, oh, something went down, right? But if they're doing that all the time, then they're going to see like, oh, this is just another whatever email. So be consistent, be, on target there, but don't forget to also talk about what makes, talk about the mission of the school too. And this is a nod to John Mihalio, who said, don't forget a mission over maintenance. You want to tell the people there's something going on this Friday and that they should be going to this and they should bring the slip in for that. That's all fine and dandy, but you also need to talk about, the goodness of the school and what's going on, so people, understand the direction and can and get to know all the beautiful things that are happening. If we're only talking about maintenance stuff, at some point people just kind of skim and delete, so be sure that parent communication is consistent and worth reading.
Oh, right. And I know, like in the previous podcast, we were talking about like every time we hear from the school, it's asking for money or my kid's in trouble. So
Exactly.
yes, consistent, predictable, and do communicate.
And that way, when you do send something that's off, they recognize that, oh, this is different. This is
Yes.
important, right? But if you just send random emails whenever you feel like it, then people will tune out. So once again, stay consistent and don't blow up their inboxes because it's a cry wolf situation.
Oh, next on our tech checklist is device update and management. Everybody loves their devices, but they don't love it when it doesn't work. What
So
are some
true.
things that you recommend in terms of update and management?
Well, number one, it's good to have an inventory and to know when those things are going to expire. And if you don't know when they're going to expire, you can randomly put the 8 year expiration date on most things.
Hmm.
So, that's pretty true for networks. That's pretty true for our Chromebooks and our iPads. Almost anything would probably need a refresh in that time. And if you're really smart about it, we'll have a separate podcast about this in the future. But if you're really smart about it, that you go about setting up the replacement cycle so that things don't break and you're replacing them in cycle and not wasting money. A lot of schools will spend, a ton of money one summer on like 100 devices.
Hmm.
And then, in a few years, they got to replace all those devices. They have to buy another 100. But if
Right.
you're buying 20 a year instead of 100 in one shot, then it becomes very feasible. And your budget, this is the genius part, your budget stays consistent. We have X number of dollars that we spend on the technology stuff every year, and it's all in cycle. So I would get it inventoried. I would get it on the schedule, put the expiration date on your inventory. And so you can look at planning out how those things work. And then, make sure everything gets managed. I know it's easy to pull things out of the box and then put them out and everything works fine and dandy. But if it's not managed, then you don't really have control over those things. And that's where you can get into some trouble. So once again, reach out to our IT team. If we're doing Chromebooks, Google admins, $38 license one time for the life of the device. Very reasonable because you're probably going to get to 8, 10 years out of that device.
Hmm.
And for iPads, you're going to get a yearly device fee for a management license. And I'd recommend Mosel for that. 550 per device per year. It basically works out to like 50 cents a month to manage that device. It's just nothing. I know it all adds up, but the idea that you'd have to go around in the old days, we'd have to go around to every device, type in like 16 passwords to update things is huge. And, to be able to tell your tech team, hey, I need this new app for this upcoming whatever, and that can
Right.
be pushed out to it immediately or, within a few minutes, that's priceless. Saves time and therefore you got more time for other things.
Oh, right. Because we don't, as a tech team, we don't go to the school every single day. If the kindergarten teacher just needs a simple app like, oh, can you put this app on my classroom iPads so the kids can work on whatever? How great would it be to be able to say, okay, give us like 30 minutes and we'll push it out, as opposed to you have to wait until next week. So that software is essential.
Yeah. And all the other things like, oh, the iPad's locked. Okay, let's unlock that.
Oh, right.
It went missing. Where is it? All these things, the management makes it easier. So having that in there and having things on that cycle makes a huge difference.
Big question is who's doing all this management? We need a tech leader. Who are your tech leaders at your school? What have you seen, Thomas?
Well, in a perfect world, we all know in a perfect world, there'd be like 50,000 bodies running everything in the schools. But, we at Catholic schools, we're pretty slim in terms of the staff that we have.
Mhm.
And you can get by with, having one of the admin handle a lot of the stuff because it's a lot easier than it used to be. You might need some help setting it up.
Mhm.
But what we would love to see is somebody on site. That's great. If you've got a tech coordinator, great. They're managing on site. If you don't have a tech coordinator, then you can have a fractional CTO, if you will. That's a fancy name for, can I have somebody who deals with this sometimes? And that person can be, your tech team, and they can manage it using somebody on site who is a tech liaison. Just having somebody who's on site who can reboot something or pull a serial number for whatever. It's a great way to deal with a lot of these big things without the overhead of having a whole other body inside the building. And that's our entire business is built on the fact that not everybody can afford to have a body in the building. And so therefore, we just need a little bit of expertise to help us get through a lot of these things. So that would be the ideal situation. And that tech liaison should not be the principal. It shouldn't even be the vice principal, although I see that happens a lot. If you have an aide or a teacher who's a little bit more savvy, who's got a period free here and there,
Mhm.
those are the type of people that would be perfect for this. And they don't necessarily have to be great at stuff. They just have to be great at, following directions, working with somebody else to resolve a problem, all those things that we love about teachers in general.
Right.
So it should be somebody who's, willing to walk through those steps, because 95% of the stuff can be handled with somebody remote, but you just need some hands sometimes and some eyes sometimes. And so we can walk through people if they're patient enough.
Right. And it could be like a simple trade-off. It's like, oh, you're relieved from 1 yard duty a week to handle or communicate to the tech team, like, hey, what are some of the problems? It's just about, someone being available to ask questions and, just do the password reset or just like reboot something. So, yeah, it'd be great. If you don't have a tech coordinator or a tech teacher on site and it's, just could be a classroom teacher, could be an aide, a good resource is our tech group with our archdiocese. And we'll leave a link in the notes. So if you want to join the SF Tech KA group, that's a perfect place to ask questions like, hey, I need to block YouTube. What's a good way to do it? Just find your resources, find your community.
Yeah, and if you're not local, we can help you figure out what group you can join, because there's definitely national groups, and there's also, groups probably local to your area that we could help you find so that you have that group to lean on. It's so important to be able to reach out to other folks and get help. Another thought though is, if we go back to this idea of having a staff member who can do something, one thing, if you've got the bandwidth for it, and not the internet bandwidth, but the
Uh-huh.
staff bandwidth, you know, a role that's maybe below the student council type situation, but you have a teacher who can run, we used to call them mouse squads, but basically a student IT team.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you wouldn't give them anything sensitive, but they could handle a lot of the stuff and do the information gathering. Because a lot of times we'll get a request in and we ask a handful of questions. What's that device? What class were they in? What app were they using? Those types of things. The kids can be the eyeballs in the room and collect that data and submit it to the form, or even just collect it to hand to that teacher. And that teacher can be the one who, maybe handles the deal or passes it on to somebody like us. But having a couple kids in every class, and I usually like to get 4 in each class,
Mhm.
so you have the 2 as backups. No one's ever going to miss because they're sick. That you have these kids who are looking out and they're just doing the small stuff and not being, the police or anything. But, a great way to check the cart is plugged in at the end of the day, and that everyone's device will be charged tomorrow. That's a nice little, 30-second task for them to do that will save a huge deal. Is it plugged in? Did we turn this off? Can we save electricity? Did we turn off the TV at the end of the day or the projector? We don't want to burn out the bulb, so let's get the projector off. Small little things that they can do, and they can do actually a lot. If you give them a little bit of training, you don't have to give them access to anything you don't want to give them access to, but it's a great way to build up what you have locally without spending a ton of money. And you're not going to use them so much that you have to worry about child labor laws. So it's a great leadership task for somebody who may or may not be, suited for president of the school. But there's a lot of kids who can do really well at this kind of thing, who can be organized, who can gather the data and can help out their fellow students. And what better way to show, service than to service to each other? So, think about that. It's not much to do. We can help train folks if they don't know how to do this with their students, but it's a great way to build more responsibility to the students so they're not destroying devices.
Oh, yeah, definitely ownership. And if you don't have an organized school-wide student tech team, what I've done in the past when I used to teach, I used to have like two people as the office monitor, two people as the lunch monitor. So you have two people in your classroom and could be on a rotating basis where they're the tech for the week. So there's not always looking at, oh, it's that same kid, just
Right.
hand it. So everybody has ownership and has the opportunity to learn. It could be something as simple as like, hey, at the end of the day, the two of you are in charge of plugging in your Chromebooks or plugging in your iPads. And that way, as you know, the thing that breaks most frequently are the chargers. Hey, if you're in charge of it, then you'll be more careful, or the kids will
Yeah,
be more careful and they'll be more mindful of it.
definitely. It solves a lot of those problems. Most kids don't destroy things, but if there's not a system in the classroom, things get destroyed. Plain and simple.
Right. Speaking of devices, like how do we pay for all this stuff? Right. And you're talking about excellent strategy is to like schedule your purchases in smaller chunks. Because I know you recommended to some of our schools where you're like, oh, hey, this year we're going to order for this class. Next year we'll order for this class. So, what are some other strategies for funding?
Well, there's obviously some of the state things that you have available. We have in California here, we have the CTF, and so you can get some discounts on your subscriptions, like your internet services and maybe your
Mhm.
phone services. Devices, to get discounts on devices, you can plan your purchases at the quarterly ends.
Yeah.
So all vendors will try to make their quotas at the end of the quarter, right? So what's that? Like the end of March, the end of June, the end of September, and they'll try to get those things in there. So there's usually a pretty big discount. So if you buy on those cycles, you probably save some money there. But you also can use groups like TechSoup and E-Rate in certain circumstances where you can get, discounted prices and some things that are paid for. I think it's also, we talked about this in the fundraising. If you set that budget aside and you say that this one fundraiser will forever, take care of this one cost, then parents know that you're not always talking about technology. And I think that's one of the big, problems of forever is we've been buying technology forever. And, are we making any progress? So we want to make progress. We want to make sure we got the right technology, and we want to make sure that the parents realize that money's being well spent. So if you are going to do it in a fundraiser moment, make sure it's consistent there too. But yeah, there's a handful of ways. There's also some ways that you can use. You can plug some holes with used devices and save yourself some money. So little strategies here and there.
And I've seen in some more traditional sense of funding devices is that when students get to upper grades, like my school had an iPad program for middle schoolers, but the lower grades didn't, then the middle schoolers would have a technology fee or a rental fee or of some sort. So you could do it in that way too, where it's a small portion of the cost of the device, but over 3 years. So what I did was like an iPad was about $500. I just divided by three. So each middle school student paid about 125, $150 to pay over the course of the 3 years. So it was more manageable for families too.
Yeah, and if you spread that, so if you use the technology fee, we actually worked this out with one of our schools
Mhm.
that between purchasing a new device, one set of devices every year, and maybe the repair cost or the insurance cost of protecting those devices, I guess we worked out it was $78. For $78 a year, you could have a new device and have it quote unquote insured, right? And so that way, that like you can replace any device that comes that might be broken. You're probably going to lose about 10% of them. But that fee, $75, is not a lot, to
Right.
ask for a family. And if you throw that into your fees, it becomes very easy to collect that at the beginning of the year. But even if you broke that down per month, it's so cheap to be able to afford a new set of devices. But that's because you've made the plan, you've got it on schedule, you're not trying to overbuy your budget. So you have to be really organized about that, but it's so simple. And that's something that you could do across the board. Any school can manage even their small number devices. If you've got a gazillion kids and you need a gazillion devices, it still works that way. So, reach out to your tech vendor and see how you can make that plan. But really, you want to think about how you're replacing those things and who's paying for it. And that very well could be a student fee.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like when we do textbook adoption. You don't adopt all those textbook all in the same year. you do it over time and you kind of look at like, hey, when are the licenses due and whatnot. What are your takeaways? What are the main things where you're like, really look out for these things, or these are like the top of your priority?
I would say that the two things I would push everybody to do, like today,
Hmm.
as you're listening to this, is one, schedule a meeting, or if you can do it today, get on it, but look at the access. Do you have access to everything? Who has access to it? Get that all written down and figure out how you need to get that. Get your password manager set up, whatever it might be. And then
Uh-huh.
number two, think about all the stuff that you have in the building and when can you figure out roughly when it was purchased? And so that we can start thinking about what needs to be replaced first. And I think if you can put those two things together, get all your access together and who's on that list, and then all of your devices and when you need to replace them, you are ahead of the game. So far ahead of the game. And that will just help out with budgeting and everything else, if you've got those things organized. So those would be the two things I would say everybody do right now. And if you can't do it right now, schedule the meeting, send off the calendar invite to whoever you need to talk to about it now, right now, go, ready, go.
Oh, my one thing is, hey, backup. What's your backup? I get
So
so
true.
many requests trying to save people's data. Like, what's your plan?
Yeah. Get a plan. Remember, 3, 2, 1, 3 copies, two identical, one in a different place. Get her done. We're going to put this technology checklist in the show notes. And if you need help with any of these things or you want to talk more, please reach out to us. You can follow the links there. And most importantly, just consider all these things. Get on your calendar. Maybe this is, if you can't get it done now because you're worried about Thanksgiving and Christmas at the time of this recording, this is a great January task to make sure that you're on schedule for the rest of the year and for next year. So get this stuff out there. Reach out if you need help. And we hope that this helps. Thank you, Becky, for helping me go through that and really for your expertise in putting this all together.
Oh, thank you. And if you like this episode, also check out our podcast on funding because we have to pay for all this stuff.
Exactly. Check it out and look out for the device management and device cycle podcast that will be coming up in the near future.
Alrighty, thank you.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for joining us on In Search of Catholic School Excellence. We hope you heard something inspiring or something you'd like to try at your own school. Please share this episode and leave a review to help others find us. To see how we can support your journey toward excellence, visit ilovemytechteam.com. Until next time, celebrate what's working and keep reaching for what's possible.